Hello and welcome to Mindfulness Session 1. So as usual we're following the Marsha Linehan handouts and worksheets, and so for this session you're going to need handouts 1 to 5C and worksheets 1 to 5C of the mindfulness module. Also be really useful if you had a pad of paper and a pen. We're just going to jot down some notes as we go through this. So first of all, I just want you to just become a little bit more aware of how you're sitting, what your posture's like, and just scan your environment. Just think about, is there anything I need to move out of the way that's likely to distract me? Or is there anything that I need to adjust that's going to help me pay full attention to the video? And just remember that you can pause this throughout. So if you've been listening for a long time and you think I'm really not taking this in now, pause it. Go off, do a small task, walk around the garden, do something so you take a break and then come back to it. You might also find there's a couple of YouTube videos that are really useful and really short, not like this one. So one of them is DBT Mindfulness Skill, an overview of Wise Mind and the What and How skills. And that's by the Sunrise Residential Treatment Programme. And the other one is a really quick one, it's possibly about under 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. It's YouTube again, it's called Why Mindfulness is a Superpower. It's an animated video, it's always my favourite. Okay. So in this video we're going to be looking at mindfulness and wise mind, and the two are interplay. So mindfulness helps us achieve wise mind, and wise mind means that we are more mindful of what's going on. So the two, we're going to go backwards and forwards between the two. And we're also going to look at why mindfulness skills and what makes DBT mindfulness slightly different from what you might have in your head, the assumptions you might have in your head about what mindfulness is. We're going to look at how do you do mindfulness, how do you practice. So first of all, we're going to look at why mindfulness skills. When you look at this picture here, is this your idea of what mindfulness is? Does it feel like it belongs to a group of people who you can't really relate to because you've found yoga difficult in the past, or it feels like you have to do it for a really long time? Those were certainly my preconceptions about mindfulness, but actually DBT mindfulness is different. This is about training our brains. So have there been times when you find that your brain goes off, drifting off, wandering when you want to concentrate on something? Do you find it gets hooked on something specific and then keeps going back to it when you want to have a look at other things? Does it ever tell you that there are fearful things around when actually there aren't? And does it sometimes focus on just one part of the picture rather than the whole and stop you seeing the bigger picture? So would you like to be able to bring your mind back when you need to, when you want to? DBT mindfulness is about a discipline. It's not about relaxation. That's an absolute bonus if it happens. It's about being much more aware of what our brain is up to and learning how we bring it back to what it is we want it to focus on. Now, what is great about that is that that process in itself reduces our suffering and increases our happiness, which sort of makes sense because it reduces how strongly we react to life events. And it helps us change how we react to stressful situations so that we feel calmer, and when we feel calmer we feel much more in control. We make better choices on the whole. The whole, being present and mindful, and how that affects our happiness is fascinating. And I've got a clip here from Dr. Dan Siegel, who talks about this. So this clip is about 3 minutes long. Okay.
Presence actually leads to happiness. And so when they do a path analysis of the correlation of you being happy and you being present, they were able to determine that it's very clear. It isn't just that you're happy so you're present. It's that you're present and that makes you happy. And the opposite of presence then is something called mind wandering, which we really want to distinguish from intentionally, let's say, resting by a lake, or, if you go to Martha's Vineyard, like you just did, resting by the ocean and saying, I'm going to let my mind wander and just relax. That's not called, in the research terms, mind wandering, because you intentionally let your mind be creatively coming up with new combinations that you don't control. That's not called mind wandering. We should come up with a different name for that. Let's call that mind freeing or something like that. But whether you're mind wandering, thinking about things that distract you from what you're doing that are negative, or even if your mind wandering is onto positive things, both of those lead to unhappiness and are associated with lower levels of telomerase. So it's a really amazing finding just in the last couple of years to explore what it means to be present. And because that's a mind, process, that is, it's your subjective experience in consciousness of having attention stream energy and information flow into awareness. That's what presence is. So rather than me thinking about what happened last week or worrying about what I'm going to do tomorrow, instead, I stay present and I'm thinking about you, and I'm thinking about this helicopter flying over where I am now and hoping everyone can hear us. And I stay present with that, whatever happens. So I'm still knowing I'm here. I'm still aware of the helicopter. It's getting distant. So I'm relaxing and I'm aware of my physiology. All that would count as presence. If I were talking to you in my mind, I'd be going, God, I got to go shopping. I've got to make dinner. My wife just took off, and she won't be here tonight. So I'll probably have to just cook for myself. What am I, if I start doing that, which I'm not doing, I'm doing it as an example, that would be mind wandering. Even if I said, oh, what a great movie I'm going to go to tonight, I wouldn't be aware of what's happening as it's happening, which is probably the simplest way of defining being present. Now, mindfulness is not synonymous with presence, and exploring the difference between those two would be an interesting exercise and probably educational and useful from a clinical point of view and how you apply this in your everyday life. But anyway, that's the idea of presence as one component of mindfulness.
Okay, so you've listened a lot. Just pause a moment and think, do you need to stretch your legs? Do you need to move? Do you need to come back? Or are you still engaged? Are you still getting what you need to out of the video? So just become aware of that throughout this video. Are there times when it would be really good to pause, just stretch your legs, come back to it? So we've talked a little bit about how mindfulness helps you increase control of your mind. And this is really important because sometimes we feel very out of control, and that is not a good feeling at all. So being able to control your mind rather than your mind being in control of you is one of the main aims of DBT mindfulness. And what we're aiming to do here is experience reality as it really is, so that we are present in our own life and we're present with others as well. So how many times has somebody been talking to you and your mind's been off wandering somewhere else, or it's been caught up in the past somewhere, or it's hooking into the worries about the future? And so it means that you're not fully present with the other person. And when you're not fully present with the other person, you're really not going to have the best of relationships. So being fully present to your own life is beneficial in itself. Being fully present when you're with others is really good for making better relationships. Okay. And I love this bit because this is our bonus. The more we are mindful, the more we practice mindfulness, the better the effect it has on our bodies. So there's been lots and lots of studies doing, and there's more and more coming out all the time. But basically what we're talking about is helping our bodies heal. Mindfulness was originally looked at to help pain. And there is so much research around about how we can be better in control of our pain and reduce pain by using mindfulness. It decreases our susceptibility to catching viruses. It decreases flu symptoms. It lowers the release of adrenaline in response to stress and improves our digestion. It lowers our heart rate and reduces side effects of heart disease. The list is pretty endless, isn't it? And it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Because when we're under stress, we're constantly moving between that flight or fight and slump phases. And that puts a great deal of strain on our body. When we're mindful and we're present, it allows our body to rest and to heal. Now there's other great stuff as well about how it affects our brain, which is just fascinating. So I'm going to play you a short clip. This one's much shorter, I promise, from Dr. Kelly McGonigal. So I'm going to play this. Now bear with me, because when I click this it goes quite quickly, so I might have to just stop and start it. Okay.
A number of different laboratories.
There we go.
Research from a number of different laboratories have shown that meditation practice increases the density of gray matter and white matter in the prefrontal cortex. So you can think of that sort of as being like a muscle that gets beefed up so that it can do things more easily, it can do hard things more easily. But that white matter means that the brain cells are better able to communicate with each other. They communicate faster and with greater integrity. And that also seems to change from the practice of meditation. By the way, this particular finding, looking at changes in the prefrontal cortex, has not just come from studies comparing meditators to non-meditators. This also comes from some research where they take people who've never meditated before and teach them some sort of meditation and mind-body technique. So there is evidence that these changes don't take decades to develop and can be seen in people who were randomly assigned to meditate.
Okay, so I love that, because that's telling me that actually I don't need to be doing this for long periods of time. I can just incorporate this into my life and it will make a difference. So even if there are pauses during the day of 1 or 2 minutes, great if you can do 3. That has a cumulative effect on our brains and our bodies. And when she's talking about the prefrontal cortex, she's talking about the thinking part of our brain. So actually what mindfulness is doing is it's strengthening that thinking part of our brain, and it's reducing the reactivity of that threat part of our brain. Now, when we're being mindful, we are far more likely to be able to access our wise mind much more easily. So let's have a look at our wise mind. Wise mind is made up of the integration, the coming together of emotion mind and rational mind. With emotion mind and rational mind, both states are incredibly useful in some situations, but actually we are far more effective when we are in wise mind. So let's have a look at emotion mind. Emotion mind, when you're in emotion mind, you really know it because your emotions are completely in control. They influence you, they control your thinking and your behaviour. It's like a hot state of mind. Now, emotion mind can be really beneficial. So intense love provides motivation for relationships. Intense devotion motivates us to stay with hard tasks. people who are able to access that passionate side of themselves can make great changes in the world. Being curious allows us to immerse ourselves in things that bring us great joy. Emotion mind can also cause us a lot of problems. When we're in emotion mind, because we're not thinking clearly, we're only seeing a very small part of the picture. So we're not very effective a lot of the time. Intense anger causes our brains to just focus on threat, that it doesn't see anything else. Intense sadness means that we lose sight of the things that are around us that are good for us. If we become immersed in sensations like fear, sometimes that's when our brain can trick us to thinking that everything around us is a potential threat when it really isn't. And if we find ourselves consumed with envy, we miss what is actually good in our own lives, and it affects our relationships. So when we're immersed in emotion mind, we're not being as effective as we need to. Equally, rational mind, reasonable mind, which is our logical thinking part of us, the part that plans and evaluates things logically, it's our cool part of our brain, that can be really useful. And it helps us organise, it helps us plan, it makes people capable of building homes, cities, taking exams, lots of things we do with reasonable and rational mind. However, it's not the whole picture, because if we cut off emotion, we're cutting off a distinct part of ourselves. Sometimes something can feel very logical, but actually it's not the best course of action for us to take. So, for instance, we might spend a lot of time in rational mind. If we spend a lot of time in rational mind, we might find ourselves thinking about every possible connotation of something rather than acting on it. So a good example of that is being in a burning building. If we're completely absorbed in emotion mind, we might find ourselves just running round and round and round and round in circles, going, there's a fire, and just not knowing how to get out. Equally, if we're in rational, reasonable mind, we might spend a lot of time at our laptop bringing up the floor plan to find out where the fire exits are. By the time we've found it, it might be too late to get out. So we need to bring the two together. Both sides are really useful to us, but wise mind is able to integrate the two. So a good example that I had of that was I was chewing on a sweet, and you probably know what's coming, don't you? Chewing on a sweet, and all of a sudden I noticed that one of my fillings had come out. Now this happened 2 days before New Year's Eve. So I had an immediate panic. There was a shock, there was a panic, and I knew that I needed some help with this. But I was in too much of a shock and panic to think this through clearly. There was a part of my rational mind that was coming in saying, you know, you need a dentist, but I couldn't think how to do this. I just felt like I couldn't really access what I needed to in order to get the help I needed. So, centering myself, accessing my wise mind, becoming calmer, more stable within myself, allowed me then to notice what was important to me, which is I really did want to get this sorted out before New Year's Eve, and I needed to find some way of using my skills so that I could get an emergency dental appointment. So all of those things came together to help me function more effectively. And that's what we're aiming to do with Wise Mind. just before we go on to the next slide, it's really important to emphasize that our capacity to access our wise mind and our susceptibility to being immersed in motion mind is also affected by things that occur to us. So if you have a look at your please skills in emotion regulation modules, you will see that there are certain things that make us more vulnerable. These are our vulnerability factors. We need to be aware of these. If we're ill, if we've been sleep deprived, we're tired. If we're using substances that alter our mood, drugs or alcohol, if we're feeling hungry, or if we're overeating, or if our nutrition that our bodies are getting is not good. If there are too many demands being made on us, so there are things happening in our life that put us under more stress, or if there are difficulties in relationships around us which cause us more stress, all of those things make us much more susceptible to being immersed in emotion mind and less able to access wise mind. So I'm guessing already wise mind feels a bit elusive, it's a bit of an abstract concept, and I think until you've sort of experienced it and practiced it, it can feel a bit uncertain. So let's have a look at how we reach it and what it actually is. So first of all, it's really important to acknowledge everybody has a wise mind. We all have that. Sometimes we might find it hard to reach it, and at other times some people might not have experienced it, but we all have a wise mind. Wise mind is sometimes experienced as a particular place in the body, and that can be quite a useful way of thinking about it. Now, it could be a sensation in the centre of the body. For instance, I know that I feel that my wise mind is somewhere around the sort of middle of my body. Some people might feel like it's more in their stomach. Some people may feel it's in the centre of their head, or maybe between their eyes. So just pause for a moment and allow yourself just to wonder. And you're just going to wonder about where maybe in your body your wise mind sits. And you don't have to come up with an answer. You're just going to allow your brain to wonder about that question. It's really important to acknowledge that it's not always easy to find or even be sure about wise mind. And here's the difficult bit, is sometimes we're so keen to find it, that keenness gets in the way of us really listening to ourselves. So in finding wise mind, we need to take the pressure off ourselves a bit. And sometimes if we're not quite sure whether this is wise mind or not, and we know that there's some emotion present, give yourself a little bit of time with it. Because if the conclusion you've come to is still the same when you're feeling calmer and more stable, more secure within yourself, then that's probably a wise mind decision. So wise mind is the part of each of us who can know and experience the truth for themselves. So what we're doing with wise mind is we're not only thinking about what externally might be going on, but we're also thinking about what's right for us, what feels right for us. And part of that might be the idea that it's like a sort of intuition. But I always think that intuition feels like we've just sort of plucked it out of the air, but our intuition is actually informed. It's informed by ourselves as people, but also the experiences that we've been through. So wise mind is pulling all of this together. It integrates all those ways that we have of knowing ourselves and our environment and our experiences. And it is free from judgment and conflict. finding wise mind takes a lot of practice. So when you're starting on this journey to explore wise mind and how making use of it can make your life much more effective, bear in mind that it can take a lot of practice. So small bite-sized pieces many times a day, much more effective than fighting against it and being frustrated with yourself because it doesn't seem to be happening. Okay, so how do we reach it? Well, what we do is we need to create a pathway. Now, I don't know about you, but you will probably be aware, I'm certainly aware, that my mind manages to tread pathways where I had no idea that it was going to create them. We only need to think a negative thought once or twice, and suddenly our brain thinks that's the path it's going to go down. And we find ourselves revisiting that whether we want to or not. So the pathway to wise mind is one that we want to create ourselves and one we want to keep clutter-free. Okay, and there are a number of ways of doing that, and this is about having an experiment and seeing what works for you. But what we're going to start with is doing it through accessing our breathing, and then we're going to look at a way of sort of telling a story within ourselves. Okay, so bear with me. So first of all, get yourself reasonably alert and comfortable. Okay, so as you're sitting there, what I want you to do is I want you to just allow your mind to focus on your breath. I want you to attend to your breath coming in and your breath going out. And just allow yourself just to breathe naturally in and out, attending to that breath going in and out, so that you can just let your attention settle into your center. Almost like you're imagining it being at the bottom of your breath when you inhale, and going back down to the center when you exhale. That very centered point is wise mind. And as you breathe in, I just want you to say wise silently to yourself. And as you breathe out, and to say mind silently to yourself. And you just repeat that wise breath in, mind breath out. And as you do that, just want you to allow yourself to notice whereabouts in your body wise mind is for you. And then just allow yourself just to pay it some attention, to notice it, and then to just listen without preempting any answers. And then just allow yourself to just ask wise mind the question, what would help me feel good about myself? Just allow yourself to notice whatever comes up. As you're doing that, I then want you to just notice being centered in wise mind, and then allow yourself just to expand your awareness. So you're going to become a bit more aware of your surroundings, maybe noticing something on the wall or something on a table. Just expand your awareness to things around you. And then finally just becoming more aware of your surroundings and just bringing yourself back into listening to me and watching this video. Allow yourself to pause and just jot down some things that you noticed. Now you might be sitting there thinking, well, I didn't notice anything, and that's okay. This is the first time you've done this. So it just needs a bit of practice. The more you practice, the more we create that pathway in our brain. And it may be that that way of practicing is not the right way for you. So we're going to have a look at a different way of doing this. We're going to have a look at a more imagery-based way of doing this. Okay. So I want you to imagine that there's an inner pathway within you. Imagine that you are walking along this pathway. You're going at your own pace. And around you, you can have the lighting any way you want. You can create the environment that you want. And as you're walking, you can sit and rest whenever you need to. All you're going to do is just notice how you're moving towards the very centre of you along this pathway. Notice when you need a bit more rest. Notice when you need to change the environment around you. Notice how you feel. You're just going to continue walking along that inner pathway towards the very centre of you until you arrive at your own still point. And just recognise that wise mind within you. Just allow yourself a few moments noticing what that's like. And then when you're ready, I want you to just come back to the room. Open your eyes if they were closed. And just try to maintain that awareness of that very clear centre that was within you at that time. And just notice whether this was an effective way of finding that part of you that's wise mind. So now we're going to look at what we do and how we practice mindfulness. When we're mindful and we're present, we're more able to access wise mind. We're more able to be more collected in ourselves. We're more able to experience happiness. And we have better control of our mind. So, what are the what skills for practicing mindfulness? So the first one is observe. Now, how many times do we actually do that in the present? I don't know about you, I am particularly bad at observing my whole environment while I'm driving. So I am just focused on the road, and quite frankly, anything could happen either side of me and I probably wouldn't notice. So we each have things where we're just focused on things without being aware and noticing the whole picture. So sometimes it's better to do this as an experiment to see what it's like than me try to explain it. So if we are noticing what we're experiencing through our senses, that observation, I want you to just experiment with. If you've got a table to hand, or you've got the arms of a chair, I just want you to just very gently and slowly move your hand to that surface. And as you're doing that, I want you to observe sensations in your hand just touching the surface that it's now going to be pressing against. And just leave that there a moment, and all you're going to do is you're just going to observe what you're experiencing through your senses. And as you're doing that, you might observe what you're seeing. You might observe sounds that are coming into your awareness. So then if you allow yourself to just lift your hand off that surface, I just want you to observe what that feels like. So with observing, we're not labeling anything. We're not describing, we're just noticing what that's like. And we're noticing all of our senses. So what it might feel like, what we can see, what we can hear, what we can smell, the sensations in our bodies. So for instance, if you were to look at the picture on the slide, just notice what you observe without labeling it. And that brings us down to the next part of describing. When we're being mindful, we're describing the facts. We're putting words on the experience. So for instance, if we were describing the facts without putting a label on it, we were looking at this picture here, we might notice the shape of a person. And though that's the fact, we don't know anything else about this. Now there's lots of things that we could project onto there, but actually mindfulness is about just staying with the facts. So even to the extent that we could say, actually, if we were describing, I notice an object on the back of the person, and the object's black. Now, we don't know what that is. If we weren't being mindfully describing, we might go, it's a backpack. So we put a label on it. But actually, mindful describing would be it's an object that's on somebody's back and it's black. When we're looking at the green parts of the picture, we might automatically just go to their trees and we might dismiss them. Because it's almost like if you feel you know something, then you sort of skip on to the next thing. But if you actually observe and try to describe just the facts of what you're seeing, the facts might allow you to count the tall, green, leafy plants that you see in front of you. It might allow you to describe the different shades of green that you see. It might allow you to describe the difference between the taller green parts and the shorter. It might allow you to describe the light that you see at the top of the picture. So when we're observing and we're describing, we're looking at the facts, and that also applies to our inner experience as well. So we're just noticing. So I might be noticing, so as I was sitting there, I just became noticing that my body was leaning forward. And so noticing that, I just adjusted it and moved it back. I might be noticing a level of tension within myself. And that's what we'd be saying, I notice a level of tension. Maybe I notice sadness, or I notice a thought. So you're noticing, you're observing, and you're describing the facts. You're not putting an interpretation on those. And we're going to come to that a little bit later in the next slide. Now the other thing with the what skills is we are fully participating in that moment. And that can be really hard work, because actually we're used to using and drifting through life without really paying attention to what we're doing or whether we are fully participating. And there might be things that get in the way of that. We might feel embarrassed sometimes, might feel a bit awkward sometimes. Actually, participating mindfully is about throwing ourselves completely into the activities of that moment so that we become one with whatever we are doing. We become immersed with it. Some people might say sort of accessing that flow. When we're in that flow, that zone, that's when we're fully present, where we're much more able to feel happiness. So how do we do it? We know what we're doing. How do we then do it? So the first thing that's really important is that we do it non-judgmentally, and that is so much harder than it actually sounds, isn't it? We have really good intentions, but we judge all the time. Be very aware of shoulds, musts and oughts. Those ways we have of creating rules where they really aren't any, or developing rules from something that was relatively straightforward. So we judge all the time, we attach our own values to things. So what we're wanting to do with mindfulness is acknowledge the differences, but not evaluate them as to whether they are good or bad. So for instance, if you had a long line of different flavours of jam, let me think. Okay, so you might have your normal strawberry and raspberry. You may then have blueberry, orange, blackcurrant, kiwi. I'm trying to think of another one off the top of my head. What did you notice as I went through that list? Were there ones that you were drawn to? Did you find at any point you went, don't like that? Did anyone find when I went for strawberry or raspberry, went, oh yeah, that's my favourite kind of jam? When everybody talks about something, we automatically judge, we evaluate it as to whether we feel it's good or bad from our own experience or our own values. Whereas noticing differences is something that's more mindful. So we might try the jams and we might notice and become more attuned to the different tastes, different textures of what we're noticing. So we might taste the strawberry, might notice a sweetness that's different from when we taste the kiwi jam. Or the blackcurrant jam. We might notice a tartness when we taste the blackcurrant jam. So what we're noticing is a tartness or a sweetness or a texture without evaluating it and doing the or oh, I love that one. We're just noticing the difference. It's the same way if somebody is trying to tell the difference between different types of precious stones. What they're going off is a criteria that they're using. There's no judgment about that stone as to whether it's worth something or not. They're categorizing it into different areas. And that's what we're wanting to do with mindfulness. We're wanting to be non-judgmental about what we're actually seeing and hearing and perceiving. So for instance, the weather's a really good one. When you look outside at the moment, what do you notice about the weather? Do you notice that there is light outside, that there is warmth outside? You can see the sun in the sky and you can see how that's shining down and creating warmth. Equally, it may be that you're noticing is water, you're noticing rain, you're noticing droplets as they come down, you're noticing whether those are quite dense and thick or whether they're quite fine and light, and how frequently that rain is coming. And what you're doing is you're noticing and you're describing it without judging it. So without going, oh no, it's raining, or yay, the sun's out, or for some of you, oh great, it's raining, and oh no, the sun's out. So everything we're noticing and describing, we're doing it non-judgmentally. And the other thing we're doing is one mindfully. Now, if you've ever climbed a climbing wall, and I haven't, nor have I any intention of doing, what you will notice is that it becomes very obvious that moving one limb at a time is going to be the most effective way of getting to the top. And that mirrors life. Doing one thing at a time is what makes us effective. It is a complete myth that we are all great at multitasking. Every study that's been shown says that we're really not. We're more effective when we're focused on doing one thing at a time. And a bit like when we're watching this person climbing up the climbing wall, that moving one limb at a time, steadily, one mindfully, is the best way of getting to the top of the wall and reaching the goal. So an example that I used, I think it was on a different video as well to here, is stapling. So one DBT Skills session, I handed out a bunch of handouts, and somebody very perceptively noticed that actually all the staples were at slightly different angles, and some of them were falling off the paper. They hadn't really stapled very effectively. And when that was brought to my attention, I realised that what I was trying to do was several things all at the same time. I was busy stapling while I was thinking about the next lot that needed to be stapled and thinking about something else that I was doing afterwards. And it became very ineffective, and I felt quite rushed and out of control with that. So the next time I went to staple the handouts, I decided to do it one mindfully in the moment and focus on each bunch that needed stapling and positioning the stapler at an angle that would be most effective, and then just noticing that staple going in and then carefully moving it to some side. So not only did I have a pile of handouts that actually stayed together, but I also felt much more calm and control myself. So that's the reason why when we're doing mindfulness, we do it one mindfully. And the next one is effectively. There are so many things that we do where we dig our heels in, where we fight against things that actually we have very little control over, where we sit on our hands when we should be doing things that are much more productive. And we do this, and it gets in the way of us being very effective. So when we're practicing mindfulness, what we're wanting to be is open to the experience we're having in that moment, to experience reality as it is, not how we particularly want or need it to be, but actually what we're doing is we're being open to that experience, and we're letting go of that willfulness of digging our heels in, and just in that moment we are letting reality be what it is. So those are the how skills of how to do mindfulness, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we learn from mindfulness and do a short mindfulness exercise so we can bring these what and how skills together. So, how to learn from what we notice? Well, for one thing, what we're really good at when our mind goes off wandering is telling people the entire story of where we went off when our mind wandered. And that's not helpful, because we're getting caught up in the story rather than how we actually bring our mind back. So what we're wanting to focus on is how do we bring our mind back rather than the details of where our mind goes off hijacking us. We don't want to get caught up in the story. We do want to notice what our mind is doing. We want to increase our awareness of that, because when we increase our awareness, we can catch ourselves doing it and we can bring ourselves back. So you might want to jot these down. These are the sort of things that our brains get up to. Our brains become attached to things. And they particularly become attached to things that strongly provoke a positive or negative reaction. So a bit like if we could take the jam situation. As I read out the list of different flavours of jams, you might have noticed that you perhaps wanted to go back to your favourite jam. So for me, I do like raspberry jam. So my brain will want to keep coming back to being attached to the raspberry. It won't want to look at the other jams. Equally, if there's a jam on there that you really did not like at all, where you think, ooh, you had that reaction, your brain will attach to that to want to avoid going there. So our brains attach to things all the time. We might, for instance, be asked to smell different types of scent. And rather than open ourselves up to that experience and smell all of those, we might smell one, like it, and just want to stay there. So our brain gets attached to things. In the same way that our brain makes up rules of what we should and shouldn't do all the time. Sometimes those rules have never been said. We sort of assume that that's what we should be doing. And then we create a rule, we live by the rule without ever challenging it. Assumptions play a big part in this, so we don't check things out, we just assume it's going to be that way. And in the same way, we have expectations of things. So if you're somebody who has high expectations of yourself, you're likely to have high expectations of other people as well, and that is going to colour how you see the world. We also get a lot of uninvited thoughts that come into our heads. So when we're trying to do things, our brain goes and hijacks us and takes us to something else. Sometimes those uninvited thoughts create sensations inside us and urges. When you're thinking about all of these, it really makes us aware of how busy our brains are. What it is they get up to when really we're wanting them to focus on something else. So how might this work on an everyday basis? So for instance, at work, I'm writing a report. It's got a strict deadline. I hear a noise outside. Now bear in mind, I haven't seen what's going on outside. I don't know what's happening outside. But my immediate assumption is that it's building work. And the reason that my immediate assumption is that it's building work is because this goes off my past experience, which is that I'm having some building work done in my house. So there's an association between the building work, the noise that I'm hearing, associating it with building work, and my own past experience of what was happening in my house when I left it that morning. So I start thinking uninvited thoughts about the work that's going on in my own house, and I have another invited thought about a worry that something will be missed. So already I'm making an assumption and also a possible judgment here. I have an urge to ring the builders for reassurance, even though I only spoke to them that morning, and I notice a tension, that sensation. Now by this time I might notice that I've not done much work, and I might be judging myself for that. What is clear and what is the fact of the situation is I have been distracted by something that in that moment I have very little control over. And that's where my brain has been in a very short period of time. And these assumptions, attachments, expectations, associations, uninvited thoughts are really strong, and those are what hijack us off into other places that we really didn't ask our brains to go at that time. And associations are particularly strong because that's how our brain works most of the time. It likes associations. All you need is one word, one phrase, one object, and your brain will associate it with something. So we learn by noticing what our brain is off doing, and then we look at, is this something that we do in everyday life? Because if it is, and we become more aware of it, we can find ways of training our brain to come back to where we need to. Okay, so now we're going to do a mindfulness exercise. Mindfulness exercise is an observing exercise, and we're going to observe the picture on the slide. Now, if you've got a smartphone, you're watching this on a smartphone, you might find it easier if you choose an object around you, because I'm guessing that the picture on your phone is quite small. You can use anything, it really doesn't matter what you pick up. So the task is to observe, and you're going to observe and notice what your mind does. So for instance, if you're looking at the image on the screen, what you might be noticing is different colours. You might be noticing different positions of where the objects are resting in their individual places. You might notice different shapes. And what you're going to also be aware of is what your mind's doing with that. Does it want to be drawn to a particular object? Does it find it easier if it focuses on one aspect of it? What are the assumptions, associations that come up for it, and what sort of rules are you making up in your mind right now? So the task is to observe, notice, and when your mind goes off wandering, which it's going to do because our minds do that, choose a spot for your mind to come back to. So with this, you might choose the top left-hand corner, or you might choose a particular object right now that you're going to focus on to bring your mind back. Or if you're holding and looking at a different object, look at that object and choose a spot that you're going to come back to when your mind goes off wandering, so that you know how to bring your brain back. And we're going to do this for 2 minutes. I'm going to ring the bell, and then when I'm going to ring the bell again at the end of 2 minutes. And all you're going to do is just notice. We're going to notice from an upright position, an alert position, eyes wide open. Okay. So, how did you get on? What did you notice? Just pause the video for a moment and jot a few things down, and then we'll have a look at how we can take some of that learning and make it useful and effective for us. So, isn't learning great? What did you discover? What did you notice that your brain was doing? So just jot a few things down. Were there uninvited thoughts and urges? When you noticed these, how did you get your attention back? When you noticed that thought or that urge, how did it affect how you engaged in the task? Did it make it easier or harder to do the mindfulness exercise? Were there associations that you noticed? Did you have expectations about what was going to happen? What assumptions did you make? And did you create any rules for yourself? And then have a look at, does this ever happen outside of this mindfulness exercise? Is this a pattern in everyday life for you? And if you've been able to identify that, how useful is that? Because once you're aware of it, you're going to start being more and more aware of it, and then you have much more control about what you do with it and how you bring your brain back. So now comes the practice part. And if you have a look at this image, sometimes when you're practicing and the arrows are all going outside the target, it can be really frustrating. But you know what? The more you practice, the more you create a pathway in your mind to wise mind and mindfulness practice, the more times that you hit the bullseye. You can do this. Because how good does it feel when you finally get there and you think, oh my goodness, I've been able to bring my mind back. I've been able to notice what it was hijacking me into, and I get to experience wise mind. How great is that?